Okay, looks like we're live.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, 3 o'clock on the dot.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, Fatmata?
I am doing very, very, very well.
That's good.
So, want to introduce everyone to Dr. Derek Marryshow. I've known him for over 20 years now, and he has been a great asset in our special education world. And I'm so happy to have you here with me today to talk a little bit about what parents need to know and what they need to do during this time of pandemic. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Marryshow.
Well, I am a child psychologist, and over the years, I've conducted psychological evaluations. The main area that I've worked in is advocating for children receiving special education services, ensuring that they're appropriately identified, evaluated, and if they require services, that those services are provided.
Okay.
And I've been doing that for close to 30 years now. The whole range of services that children need from, because I think there's two pieces we have to look at. Ensure that children who do not need special education services continue their education in the general education setting, and also those that require services in order to be successful, that they receive those services. And that's what I've been doing for quite a while.
Okay. So I know that you've done this for a very long time. And I remember you were my go-to for expert witnesses when I was doing a lot more special ed cases in DC. Mm-hmm. And you helped me to get a lot of services for my kids, for my students. You helped me get the appropriate school placements for them, and they were successful. You helped me get a lot of compensatory education services for our kids to ensure that they're able to catch up based on the violations and the lack of services they receive from the school system. Now, in this pandemic, we are in a position where our parents now do not have direct services for their kids. They are the direct service providers. They are the teachers. They're the OT person. They're the occupational therapists. They're the physical therapists. They're the counselor. They're everything. So, and I'm sure there are many parents out there, I cannot speak personally, of course, but I'm sure there are many parents out there who would be very grateful to find out what, number one, what the school's responsibilities are for their special needs child. Number two, what the parents themselves need to do to ensure that those services are provided by the school system, but then also, most importantly, how the parents can deal with their children at home. So I want you to start, first of all, what our different school districts in the DMV are doing and what they should be doing for our special needs children right now.
Okay, I think those are some very important points you brought up, Fatmata, because it's important that parents know what is expected of the school during this time that their children are home and out of school. It's important to assist them in what they can do to help their children while they're at home. But before we talk about that, and also what their local schools should be doing in the DMV. But before we do that, I would just like to take a couple of minutes to talk to parents, to give parents some tips about working with their children at home and basically coping during this time of COVID-19. Because as we all know, children are home for the summer and parents are able to plan for those things. Children have spring breaks and parents are able to plan for those things. But this COVID-19 pandemic pretty much caught many people, particularly with the closing of the schools, in an unexpected way. You know, on Friday, they found out that their children are going to be home starting Monday. So, and it can become pretty difficult in terms of readjusting, trying to cope with those situations. One of the first things I think it's important for parents to do is to be able to validate for themselves and their children what they're feeling. And that validation is pretty much acknowledging how that person is feeling without agreeing or disagreeing. It shows the children and adults that they are being heard, and it helps them manage the emotions. So it's important to acknowledge for your child what they may be feeling. Children may be feeling frustrated. They may be disappointed. They may be sad that activities were canceled. Some children may have been expecting to attend their graduation, and that may not be happening. So it's important to help children acknowledge those things. Let children know that it's okay to have these feelings, and that their family is going to support them in it. But, like children, it's important that parents and adults, the parents are validated as well, because these changes can really turn folks' life upside down, particularly if they haven't had sufficient time to prepare for it. They can feel very exacerbated, worried about how they're going to deal with these things. So it's important to acknowledge those things to themselves and really be empathetic with their children. Acknowledge to their children how their children feel this unusual situation that may be more emphasized for children with disabilities. Because as we know that disabilities, special education disabilities, run a whole range. Some children may have mild disability, moderate, others may have a severe disability. Right. And it's important for parents to be able to communicate with their children and be empathetic and encourage them. Okay. Another point I want to make is for parents to be consistent. It's real important to do things like to maintain a routine. The routine that you had before the COVID-19 and schools were closed, if it's the pattern when they wake up in the morning, breakfast, it's important to maintain structure for children. And if they're unable to maintain that routine, it's important to create a new schedule. Create a routine for children. It may be a routine around social distancing and around hand washing. So when you get up in the morning, it's important that if you step outside, you wash your hands, that if the ice cream truck is coming past and you go out to the ice cream truck, maintain social distance. So routines are very important as well. Another thing I want to talk about is how assist parents in giving them just some suggestions on how to deal with screen time, because children are home. And sometimes it's easy to let them, because oftentimes children want to do that, spend a lot of time in front of the television, spend time on their laptops, their tablets, on their cell phones. So it's important, and that can be part of the structure as well in terms of how they use screen time. Now, we're going to be talking about what the school is responsible for doing in terms of virtual learning and those kind of things. And that can assist in the structure of their daytime in terms of when online classes are occurring and what they do between that, what they do after that. Okay. Also, I think it's important to be creative with regards to socialization. Of course, we know social distancing is important, so you can't have your friends over. But you can have some screen time. You can use various platforms like the platform we're using, Zoom. There's also Microsoft has Teams. So you can use various platforms to have your children communicate with their friends. I do want to emphasize, though, that any social media that your children are engaged in, it's important to monitor it. Monitor who they're interacting with and who they're engaging with. The last point I want to make with regards to just a few brief tips is I think it's important for adults, for parents to engage in common activities because it can become very stressful when you're in the house, maybe a spouse in the house, the kids are in the house. There's a lot of anxiety about what's going on with the COVID-19.
Mhm.
So it's important to engage in some common activities, such as deep breathing. Take a breath of fresh air. I think it's important for parents. So, for example, deep breathing, a good deep breathing exercise would be, and I would suggest folks do it early in the morning, sometimes hopefully before the kids wake up, so you can get yourself started, and in the night before you go to bed, to get yourself calm, to get yourself centered, to be able to deal and interact with your children.
Can you hold on for me a second, Dr.
Sure.
Matthew? I'm thinking we're having some Facebook issues. Let's see, hold on. It looks like somehow they had cut us off Facebook, and I need to get us back on there.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I see it says Facebook, the meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was saying the last point I was given with regards to assisting parents just coping in the home with your children home and getting them engaged. And I was speaking of common activities, activities that can help parents get centered, I would say, so they can have a more productive day with their children and a less stressful experience. One of the common activities that I often recommend to parents is each morning, do this routine in the morning and at night. First thing in the morning, preferably before the kids are up, open the window and take 10 deep breaths in through your nose, hold it, out through the nose. Deep breathing rushes energy and oxygen to the brain, and it centers a person and give them more relaxed, preparing them to deal with the day. And so that's a deep breathing exercise. They can do that 10 times in the morning. Just open a window and deep breath in, hold it for 10 seconds and release it. Do that about 10 times. And do a balanced breathing exercise, which is covering one nose and breathing in through your nose, covering the other one and letting it out. And do that again. Do 10 of those. And then I would say, not meditation, but a meditative exercise. To close their eyes and just clear their mind. Try not to think about anything at all for about 5 minutes. And after they do their breathing exercise and a meditative exercise and they feel calm and relaxed, identify one positive affirmation. It could be simple as, I am going to have a great day, or my children are going to do all their chores today. Some positive affirmation that they can repeat throughout the day. Those minor kind of routines, and do it at night before they go to bed. Those some minor routines that can help one deal with the stressful experience that we're dealing with the COVID-19 and the children in the home, and folks may or may not be essential workers and have to go out to work and come back home and worried about if they're bringing something home to the children. So there's a lot of stress. So those are just some routines that they can use around getting centered and dealing with stress.
Okay. So, so if every day you do that to help the children deal with stress of being indoors, would you recommend that they go for walks, around the neighborhood to kind of decompress?
I would. First, I would say, of course, practice social distancing. And exercise is very important in dealing with stress as well. So it could be taking a walk to the park or walking around the block. In fact, in my neighborhood, I see more people walking now than prior to this pandemic. So yes, it's definitely a way to get out of the house, practicing social distancing, but getting exercise and getting the children out and helping them use some of their energy, so when they come back in, they can be a little more relaxed and maybe go to sleep and get some rest, go to bed early at night. So yes, I would definitely recommend a routine such as that.
Okay. So in your work as, first as a child psychologist, and then of course as a special education advocate, what disabilities have you worked with or worked for or advocated for?
Sure. Now there's a range of disabilities that children receive services for. And I've actually worked with children, and there's about 7 or 8 identified under the Individual Disability Education Act, what we call IDEA, which is the federal law that guides services to children that receive special education or have special education needs. And again, these disabilities can range from mild to moderate to severe, so we have to keep that in mind. But children that may have speech and language services, speech and language impairment, or they may have a physical impairment, and they may have a specific learning disability. There are children that have behavioral concerns, or what we call an emotional disability. There are other children that have occupational needs. There are children that have traumatic brain injuries. And those things could be mild or it can be severe. And so those are just a range of disabilities that are covered under the Individual Disability Education Act, that many of our children receive services and need those services in order to be successful in academically, educationally, and as adults.
Okay. So right now, we can go into kind of talking about what parents should be expecting with the lockdown.
Sure.
The schools are closed. It's been about, I guess, a week or almost 2 weeks.
Going close to a month. Actually, the schools in the district closed around March 13th. And today is March 12th, I believe. Yes, today is the 12th. So children have been home for approximately about a month in this area.
So I'm really talking about when they actually started the distant learning, right? So where they started getting information out and giving parents like the laptops and things like that, where they made it official that, okay, school is definitely closed.
Right.
Definitely doing distance learning. It's been about how long?
Well, it varies for some schools.
Okay.
Some school systems. Some school, for the District of Columbia, for example, started, I believe they started the earliest. They started right around the 23rd, 24th of March.
Okay.
School in which children received the distant learning started. And when we speak about distance learning, and there are various terms for it, virtual learning, distant learning, but it means that the child is on some type of electronic equipment, a computer, a tablet, and they're interacting virtually the way you and I interact, in which they can see the teacher, and the teacher is actually providing instructions to them. So it's not a package, or it's not a website they just have to go on and download the work. It's actual interacting with the teacher through distant learning, and they can see the teacher and possibly other members of their class that's participating in that distant learning. So the schools, the district started around the 23rd or the 24th. Prince George's County started around the, actually Prince George's County is starting this week. They're starting on the 14th. They're starting on Tuesday with their distant learning. Now, the Prince George's County public school system Last week, the students met at their school in the parking lot, and they provided laptops and Chromebooks to them. So any parent in which the children live in Prince George's County and receive special education services, and they haven't received a Chromebook, they haven't received a laptop from the school system, they should contact the special ed chair at their neighborhood school, because that service that distant learning is beginning this week. The teachers during the first week of April, I'm speaking specifically about Prince George's County Public Schools right now. During the first week of April, the teachers had what they call professional development, in which they were training the teachers to do the distant learning. And this week, they're actually starting it. So all children in the Prince, not just children receiving special education services, but all children in Prince George's County Public Schools should be starting this week with their distant learning, virtual teaching classes. District of Columbia started, like I said, around March 24th. The charter schools in the District of Columbia started around March 24th as well. So they started approximately 2 weeks ago. With regards to Montgomery County, during the week of the 30th, they started reaching out to children with special education needs through the case managers about scheduling those virtual learning classes. So those are the three areas, the three school systems. And when we speak of Maryland, all Maryland counties, because it's really coming down from the state of Maryland. So all Maryland counties this week should be beginning their distant learning. In the District of Columbia and the charter schools in the District of Columbia, they've started already. So any parent in the district, their child attend a public school or a charter school, and if they have not been receiving the distant learning, they need to contact their schools immediately because someone did not reach out to them and their child is missing out on those services. What I would like to do, and I want to get back to those specific local school, what we call LEAs, the local education agencies, but now we talked, I mentioned Individual Disability Education Act. That federal law that guides special education services does not specifically have or does not specifically speak to what happens in a situation like we're in now.
So before you go into the idea,
yes,
let me proffer first, because since I'm an attorney doing this with you,
yes.
Just want people to understand, this is not necessarily legal advice, okay? Because IDEA is congressional legislation that was passed and put into effect. And the IDEA 2004, as we know, is the most recent one. So the IDEA really talks about responsibilities of the school system and what qualifies for special education services, what qualifies a student to receive an IEP, individualized education program or plan, and whatnot. So we will be talking about that. We'll be talking about roles and responsibilities and rights and maybe a little bit of legal responsibilities. However, this is not necessarily a legal advice to anyone viewing, and it does not create, at least on my part, an attorney-client relationship, just in case, because I will want people to respond with some questions if you have any that Dr. Marryshow and I can answer. So Derek can definitely answer some of the same questions, but you can go ahead and ask some questions that you may have in reference to your special needs child, and we will try our best to answer these questions. Anything ranging from how often you're supposed to have an IEP done, now that we are distance learning, what is the process? So Derek has experience on doing all that as an advocate. As an attorney, my thing is, of course, the legal part. And I was once an advocate before I became an attorney. So kind of both on both sides of the aisle. But just so people understand that we will want you to ask questions, but to also understand that it's going to be a broad issue and broad answers. Any specific questions that you may have, you can always contact either one of us. I will make sure I put our contact information on the Facebook Live comment section, so you can have it in case you have specific questions that you think you may want to ask offline, and you may not want to put it out there in public. Okay, so Derek, you can explain IDEA, idea for those who may not understand it, but I'm assuming that if you have a special needs child, you probably know what IDEA is and what an IEP is, and what it's supposed to do for your child. But just in case, Derek.
Yes. So the Individual Disability Education Act, IDEA, is the guiding regulation for schools, for states and local education agencies like the school district that your child attends, and how they provide your child services, what we call a free and appropriate public education, how they provide that and the requirements for providing that, and a parent's rights, because parents have rights that the school has to provide their children with specific services. Now, as it relates to COVID-19, the IDA does not, the law itself does not specifically give instructions for situation in which elementary and secondary schools are closed for an extended period of time. And for that reason, the federal government, the Federal Department of Education, have put out specific guidance. In fact, these guidance came out around March 13, 14, just when all the schools were closing. And these guidance were regarding what should happen when schools are closed with regards to children receiving special education services. So one of the questions I know many parents have is a local education agency, the school district that your child attends, required to continue to provide a free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities during school closure that's caused by the COVID-19 outbreak? And the answer to that was given in the guidance that was put forth by the federal government on around March 12th or 13th. Now, I don't agree necessarily with all of the guidance. I think but this is what it is. Basically what it said, that if the local education agency closed and is not providing services to the general education students, then they don't have to provide services to children receiving special education services. However, if they are providing services to the general education public, then they have to provide services to children receiving special education and ensure that they receive FAPE, meaning that they receive a free and appropriate education. And when we say receive FAPE, mean that their IEPs are being implemented. Now, fortunately, for most of the districts, most of the school districts in our area, and I would say across the nation, but let me speak for our area, are providing services to the general education population. We just spoke about how the district started their distant learning. Maryland is going to be starting theirs. Virginia has started their distant learning. So as a result, since the school systems in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area are providing those services, then they are required to provide not only the services that the general education students are getting to children with disabilities, but they're also required to provide them FAPE, meaning they're required to implement their IEPs and their related services. Okay, so that's an important component.
So very quickly, mark where you are so you don't lose that second, the next.
Sure.
So just so that I don't lose my thought, I did write it down, but just in case,
Yes.
still on the subject of, so as advocates, we both special education advocates, and I transferred to the sort of the attorney part. But I would say this is a perfect opportunity, right? So somebody once said in chaos or problem is where you should find solutions, right?
Yes.
So there's no actual legislative guidance or policy in place to deal with something like this. So could this be then an opportunity for those of us who are special ed advocates to advocate the Congress to put um, into law policy what schools should do for children with special needs? Because let's be realistic, right? We know all children lose, right? They lose when there is a break in education. And that's why we have summer programs, we have all those things to help the children stay sort of on track so that when it comes back after the summer break, they're not too far behind. But we know that, and you know, as a psychologist who has done tests many times over and has reviewed psychological assessments and whatnot and has made recommendations, we know that tests have shown that special needs children fall even further behind than the general ed population when there's a break in services. So I understand tying it to general ed students, and I'm not saying you should not educate the general ed students, but I think there should be an exception made for special education children because of the level of delay that comes in when there's any type of break, much less a break where they get absolutely nothing, no education, no wraparound services, no OT, PT, none of that, no speech services. So maybe this would be a time for us and anyone out there who's a special ed advocate to sort of join forces and maybe advocate, right, the Congress to make sure to sort of, now that we know it's possible that schools can on an emergency basis, like we never thought about it, right? Can actually close down the school system for the rest of the school year, because some jurisdictions are doing that right now. What do we do with special needs children during that time? So,
I think it's an excellent point. And now, one thing that the guidance that was put forth in March from the federal government did do, it included something that relate to your specific point and your specific question that you just made. And that is that, but it said that schools can include in an IEP, going forward, can include in an IEP plans for school closure if schools are closed because of some type of emergency, but it said it's not required to.
Not a must.
That's what, it's not a must. That's where your point. That's what I'm thinking. That's a very important point. So we should, yes, it would be important for advocates to lobby the Congress to make it a must. It's not, because a parent now, under the new guidance, once school reopened, can go at an IEP meeting, can say, look, I want at my child's annual IEP meeting to include a plan if school is closed for a long period of time, how are services, because that's being proactive. Because right now schools are being reactive. The guidance are put out after the fact. They're scrambling really to how they can provide related services to children. So this is being proactive by saying, I want this to be part of my child's IEP, that if we have another pandemic or in some other emergency, that my child will receive those services. But the guidance said a parent can request that, but the school does not necessarily have to honor it.
Okay. All right. So we can leave that. Let's go to the part where parents actually get the information. Sorry, folks. The advocated me now.
No, I think that's important because I wanted to make one other point beyond that. Because as we talked about children that receive special education services, some are just mild. They may have a specific learning disability, might have strong academic skills in math and writing, but in reading, they may have a specific learning disability. And then we have children that have severe disabilities that may be in a wheelchair. A child with a severe case of Down syndrome and may need a whole range of services. And when school reopens, because the schools will reopen at some point, These children that are more severe and may have health concerns may not be able, may be at high risk, may not be able to return to school immediately because they may still be at higher risk because of their medical concerns.
Exactly.
And so a parent may say, well, I don't want my child to return to school right now because the immune system may be weaker than the average child. So for those children, parents can request home and hospital services if their children are at higher risk. So even, let's say, return to school in the fall, parents can still request, and that's in the guidance that was put forth last month. So I think that's another important piece for parents to consider and think about as well.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to go down. So we talked. I briefly talked about what the different local school agencies in our area should be doing in terms of when they should be starting school. Let's talk a little bit about what they should be, specifically what they should be doing.
Hold on, your mic is breaking up a minute. Let's see something. You look frozen on the screen. Okay. Yeah, you froze for.
Can you hear me, Fatmata?
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, because I saw a little sign came up and said the internet service is unstable or something like that. Okay. So I think we're back. We're good now.
Perfect.
Yeah. Now, what I think is important for parents to do is to ensure that the children are getting the services, because again, the guidance say that the IEP should be implemented. Parents should make first thing, they should make a written request. Send an email. Most parents whose their children receive special education services know who the special ed coordinator is, or the special ed chair at the school, or even the director of special education in the county. Parents should put something in writing to a school official, doing a number of things. Formally requesting and find out what's the alternative way that you're going to educate my child, and how you're going to provide them, if they have related services, these related services. And I would encourage parents to ask for a remote IEP meeting. Say, I want to meet. I know my child got all this information about distant learning. In fact, I have received calls already from parents saying that, a couple of calls from parents from the District of Columbia saying, well, because the District of Columbia is only giving out laptops to the high schoolers, okay?
Oh.
And the elementary and middle school students, the parent had to have like some kind of specific need or requested. So I have parents that are calling me and saying, well, my child don't have a laptop and he's unable to access the distant learning. Well, I would tell parents, if they don't have internet access, or if they don't have some electronic, a laptop, a computer, a Chromebook, reach out to your special ed coordinator and let them know that just the general distant learning that the other children are receiving, my child is unable to access that information because I don't have the equipment. Okay, contact the schools, and if the special ed chair or coordinator don't give it to them, have them call you or I. Okay, but that's what the parents should do. Reach out to them, because they want to make sure because if you don't have the equipment to do the distant learning, then your child is just home not receiving the services. So if you don't have internet access, or you don't have a laptop or iPhone or tablet that can access that, or you're having difficulty, reach out to the special ed chair at the school and request that equipment. The school is responsible to make sure that the child have access to the distant learning. So they're responsible for providing that.
Okay.
That's number one. Request an IEP meeting. Since this, like we said, was not a proactive thing, it was reactive. parents need to say, well, I want via telephone, via distant learning, via distancing, I want to have a talk with the special ed chair, the person that's provided my child speech and language services. Let's have an IEP meeting via telephone so you can clarify for me how my child is going to receive these services. Okay, so that's the first thing. Request that, because even though the schools say they're going to provide those things, one of the things that parents may have difficulty receiving, most related services, and let me describe what a related service is. Children have IEPs in which they have goals on their IEPs, and but they also have related services. Some children may have a speech and language impairment, and they work one-on-one or in a small group with a speech therapist. They may have psychological counseling in which they work one-on-one at school with a psychologist or school psychologist or school counselor that help them deal with their issues or their behavioral concerns, social emotional concerns. A child may have occupational therapy to address their writing skills or their fine motor skills. And while they're at school, that individual works with them. A child may have physical therapy. So most of these related services can be provided via distance learning. The same virtual interaction that the child would do with the teacher, they can have that interaction. Counseling, speech and language services, OT, some physical therapy services for children with severe needs in which the physical therapist actually has to physically put hands on them, may not be able to be provided via distant learning, but the majority of services can be. So again, if parents or children are not receiving those services at the present time, they need to request a meeting. Okay. Another point I want parents to know is some parents go out and say, look, my child is not receiving speech and language services. I'm going to do it through my insurance, but I have to do a co-payment. Okay. And that same service, they may get it virtually through an agency. The parents need to document those things because they should and could be reimbursed for any money they spent providing those services out of pocket during this period of time that the child is not at school and the school has not been provided it. So parents need to know that, and they need to document those things. You were talking about regression, how children that receive special education services tend to regress, and that's true. That's why there's a thing called ESY, extended school year. And it's during the summertime, children receive services. If the school determined that they have regressed during holiday break, that they may regress over the summer, then they get about 3 weeks of additional educational services. Well, parents during this period of time need to keep track of their child's regression, if their child regress. And there's ways to do that. If they're doing virtual learning, they can look at if their child is able to complete assignments. If it's speech and language or counseling for behavior, so they want to be able to track, so when school reopens to say, yes, my child did regress in this area, and I can document it. If your child was having only one incident a week of tantruming, and because they've been out of school and not getting the service, that tantruming behavior has increased, well, parents should document that. So when they go back to the school, they have that kind of information to provide. Okay. I talked about requesting a team meeting now while the children is out of school. But upon return to school, parents should immediately request a meeting. So I want an IEP meeting so we can get back, because that way you may need to have revisions of the child's IEP to address any regression. They may need new goals and new services. Okay. We talked about home-based services earlier. It's called home health services. And again, if children return to school, and are they unable to return to school once school is open, it's important for the parents to request those things. I don't want to get too much into the whole due process component, but it's important that if a parent has a current, when the schools closed, they had filed a due process complaint or they had filed a state complaint, it's important for those things to go forward. Now, this is the different school districts, again, are handling those things differently. And let me just preface, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but when parents feel that their children's educational rights have been violated or the school failed to service them in some way, the child had an IEP and the school failed to implement it, or the child should have been evaluated and received services a long time ago, parents can exercise their due process rights by filing a complaint against the school system. You can file a due process complaint or you can file a state complaint. There are minor differences in there, but it's enough to say parents can file a complaint to get redress for what the school failed to do. And if a parent has filed a complaint and then the school closure occurred, these parents that process should go on. Now, different schools, for example, in District of Columbia, hearings are going to go forward via pre-hearing conference, via telephone, and actual due process hearings will go forward via telephone, remotely. In the state of Maryland, the Office of Administrative Hearing has postponed all hearings. And hearings, they had on the website, it has hearings will be postponed until school reopen, I think it's April 27, but we know pretty much, we don't believe school is going to reopen. So from that point on, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I had a hearing scheduled in the state of Maryland when school closed, and we got a call from the administrative law judge, and she said that they were actually was going to schedule a hearing via telephone. So we had it. So individual judges are doing that, but on the website, all hearings are postponed. So parents need to get more information about that, and they need to have those hearings go forward or get some information on how they're going to proceed.
Why is it important to make sure these hearings go forward? How does it help when school opens up and these hearings, or how does it affect when school opens up and these hearings have not moved forward, the issues have not yet been litigated, and decision has not been made as to the students' either need for services or whether the IEP has been violated or whatnot, or whether the student is even in an appropriate school setting or school placement? How does that affect if the hearing does not move forward? Because I want people to understand that it's not just that Dr. Marryshow is talking about having litigation for the sake of litigation, right? It's not so much that we need to have hearings during this pandemic time, but more along the lines of, at the end of the day, school will reopen. And when school reopens, what is the school going to be providing for this student who, based on whatever complaint was filed, there might have been lack of services or delay of services or inappropriate services being provided to that student. Explain what, at the end of the day, why it's actually important that we move forward with any complaints that may be pending right now before school opens.
Well, the longer it takes to resolve a due process complaint, that child will continue to be denied a free and appropriate public education. So, and then that child could fall further behind academically because they're not in the right placement, because their IEP is inappropriate, because some complaints, because the student is due compensatory education to bring them.
What's compensatory education?
I'm glad you asked that question because there's a number of things I want to say about compensatory education. Compensatory education is the purpose of it is to bring a child back to where they would have been, but the school failure to provide them some type of service. So compensatory education can come in the form of tutoring, in which the school, outside of the school day, have to fund private tutoring for that child, in which the school pays for the tutor. and that tutor and that services will occur outside of the school day. It can come in the form of psychological counseling. It can come in the form of mentoring. Schools have paid for a mentor for a student. So again, it's to compensate the student to bring them to where they would have been, but for the school failure to provide some services. Let me give you a good example of a need for compensatory education. If a parent has a child that has been receiving failing grades and having behavioral difficulties for the entire school year, and the parent has went to the school officials and said, look, my child needs help. My child is unable to keep up with the classwork, and he or she is acting up because they're unable to keep up with the classwork. And the school ignores that parent. Because sometimes a parent may not know to ask for a child to be evaluated. They may just come to the school and say, my child is having the difficulties. And if an entire year, and sometimes unfortunately, 2 years may pass by and that child has been retained or is falling behind, the behavior and academic difficulties increases. And because the school have a responsibility to identify and evaluate children, and if the school haven't done that, once that happens and the school and the child has an IEP, an individual education plan, that child is receiving services, that's great that the school finally decided to provide the child that services. But the school has a responsibility to compensate that family for that last year or the last 2 years in which the child should have been receiving those services. And so that's what it is, to bring the child back, give the child an additional services outside of the school day to bring them to that point. So a student may receive through filing a due process complaint, or an IEP team may just agree that that child needs 200 hours of tutoring to bring them to where they would have been in terms of their academic or behavioral performance, but for the school's failure to evaluate them. So that's very important that parents receive compensatory education if it's warranted. Now, the other point I want to say about compensatory education, and this is in the federal guidance around the COVID-19 that came out in March. Those federal guidance says that if a child has regressed, then the parent can request compensatory services for their child. So even if your child has been receiving all of the services, once the child returns to school, if based on, like I said, parents should document notes of the child regression, if it can be shown, even if that child was receiving some level of the services through distant learning, but if it shows that your child has regressed, then as a result of the school closures, you can still request compensatory education. So I think that's an important piece. Once schools reopen, and parents can get a determination if their child needs to be compensated during this period of time.
Okay, so right now we have, you've talked about some of the guidelines from the Board of Education and what the different school districts are doing. And we've said that if parents are not necessarily receiving what they want, they can contact either you or myself to find out more information, right?
Yes.
So in different schools, the special education coordinator has different names, correct? So
Yes.
some schools call them SEC, special education coordinator. Some call them chairs, correct?
Yes.
And what are some of the other names that you're aware of? So parents who may not be aware of who to contact will know who to go to, because every district sort of maybe have different names for their.
Yes. Absolutely. So those are some of the tools, a special ed coordinator or special ed chair. Sometimes they call them a case manager. Okay. So you can reach out to your child's case manager as well. If you're not sure you can actually reach out to the school principal. Okay. So you may not be clear who those other persons are. Your child's case manager, the special ed coordinator, the special ed chair. If you're not sure who those persons are, Most schools have a website dedicated specifically to that school. You can reach out, and they generally have the principal's email address. Reach out to the principal and said, I'm contacting you to find out who is the special ed, who is the person responsible for special education services at your school, because my child, I want to get more information on my child, implementation of my child's IEP during the COVID-19 school closure. So if you're unable to reach those specific people, reach directly out to the principal. You can reach out to the director of special education in your district. Now for Prince George's County, for example, that person name is Trinell Bowman. Unfortunately, I don't have her email address at hand right now, but
we'll put it up later
we'll put it out there, and that maybe we can put that out for the various counties in our area, and we can get that information and put that out. But yeah, so reach out to those persons, and if you don't know who that person is, reach out to the school's principal. I think that would be important. That would get you, and because it's documentation. It's just like if a parent is asking for evaluation, they can reach out to any one of the professionals in the building. They can reach out to the school counselor, they can reach out to the classroom teacher, but it's always important to put it in writing. You don't have to put it in writing, but sometimes people say, no, you didn't tell them that, and so forth. So it's important to put it in writing. So email the principal if you don't have an email address for anyone else.
So is there a timeline when they should respond to these parents when a parent reaches out and says, oh, right now, I don't have A, B, C, and D for my child during this period of pandemic, or even after? Is there a timeline when the school system should respond to these parents when they reach out to the school?
Yes. Now, during the COVID-19 period, I would think that principals should respond immediately, because kids are out of school. They've been out for quite a while, and even though principals are out of school also, they are checking their emails back and forth. But in general, if, for example, if a parent find that their children are having difficulty and they put in a written request for evaluation, then the school has 30 days to respond in terms of convening an initial eligibility meeting. Actually, the school, and it varies from school systems, but the school system, for example, in Prince George's County in Maryland, period, within 60 days, they have to determine eligibility, have an eligibility meeting, evaluate the child, and determine eligibility. They have 60 days to do that. In the District of Columbia, it's 90 days. But if in the current situation that we're in which parents just need to know, my child is home from school, and I need to find out, I don't have a laptop for my child, so they're unable to access the distant learning. Those requests the response should be almost immediately. And if it's not within a few days, I think the parents should contact an education advocate to assist them with that, because these are different circumstances.
Okay, so we talked a little about at the beginning what parents should be doing during this stressful time with their children. Now, as a psychologist, and we've gone through the legal aspect for parents as far as what they should be expecting from the school system. And if an IEP is written, should every parent have a copy of that IEP?
Yes, I think that's an important question. And every parent should have a copy of the IEP. And if the parent don't have a copy of the IEP now, they should reach out to the school. The way we indicated, the special ed chair, coordinator, case manager, principal, and ask them to email them a copy of their IEP as soon as possible, for another important reason. Because with an IEP, the parent can help their child during this period of COVID-19 school closure. Parents can assist their children in implementing the IEP service, and then to make sure that the school system and their distant learning teaching are implementing the IEP services. And some key pages of the IEP the parents should focus on. Now, I have a copy of an IEP here. It's blacked out, so you won't see any child's name on it. But some of the pages the parents should refer to on the IEP is, for example, is the goal sheet. The goals sheet on the IEP, and if the parent flip through their child's IEP, they'll see a header that said goals. And that's the actual goals and objectives saying what the child should be learning through their IEP. A goal can say a child will read 2 paragraphs without any mistakes 3 out of 4 times. You know, it could be a goal for behavior. The child will only have 1 incident of tantruming per week. But that's the goal page is what lays out what the actual task or items that a special education teacher, a classroom teacher should be working on with their child. So the parents should look at that goal sheet and even work with their child outside of the distant learning on those goals. But it also let the parents know what the school should be doing. Another important page is the related service page. Or it's called a service page. And again, as the parent flips through the IEP, they'll see that page that says service page. It tells how many hours of services that child should be receiving in terms of instructions from a special education teacher and from a general ed teacher. And it also tells what related services that child should be getting. The child should be receiving speech and language services. They should be receiving counseling, occupational therapy services. So those are key components that a parent could just flip through on the IEP and say, okay, is the school, and in their meeting with the school, can say, okay, my child has an academic goal. They have under the academic goals, they have a reading goal, they have a math goal. My child has a writing goal. They have a behavior goal, speech and language goal. Are they getting these services? How are you all going to implement those goals for my child during the distant learning period? So look, parents are the best advocates for their children. And if a parent can sit in a meeting with the school, a distant learning meeting, a distant meeting during this COVID time and say, look, I have my child's IEP in front of me, and these are the specific goals is on my child's IEP. The school is going to realize they're speaking with a parent that's informed, that's know what's going on, and they can't, pull the wool over that parent's eyes. So I think those are 2 sections. And there's another section of the IEP that calls accommodations. What accommodations? So if there's distant learning going on and there's 20 kids on the Zoom distant learning class, then your parent might say, well, that's too many. The IEP said my child should have some amount of services outside of the general ed. So will the special ed teacher schedule a Zoom session with just that teacher and my child? So my child can have what the IEP says, the type of accommodation the IEP said my child should have. So those are some key pieces, I think, that parents can empower themselves to assist their child and be very aware, have a high level of awareness of what the school should be teaching their children. And I just want to make one other point. When these classes are going on, if at all possible, these distant learning classes, I think it's important that parents don't have to sit in front of the screen, but be close by, can hear what the teacher is saying, that the instructions are productive, that it's not a chaotic situation where other kids are talking. So you want to know that if my child is having a distant learning and it's a productive session and the school is implementing the things that's required in my child's IEP.
Okay, so question. So we started off by talking about the LEAs, right?
Yes.
So we've had children who we have removed from the LEA school and put them in a private, non-public special education program, right? So if a parent has their child in one of the schools, I don't want to call any of the names, so
right.
you don't want to refer to any
Sure. Right.
Okay, so if we have a child who is in one of these specific special education, non-public schools, and they have any sort of questions or issues as far as this distance learning, do they go to the SCA? Do they go to their home school and reach out to them if no response, if they don't get a response from, say, the special ed coordinator from the non-public private school?
Yes. Very good question, because two things I want to say on this. There is some guidance, the same guidance that the Department of Education put out, and those guidance said, because these private schools are full-time special education placements with more intensive services for children. They said the guidance indicate that these schools and these teachers can be considered essential staff, and these schools could remain open. Now, I don't know any of them that have. So it's an option. They can say, because of the intensive need of the services that these children need, that they should be able to provide a distant, social distance in an environment, and that staff can become essential staff. But of all the schools I know, that's not happening. They've closed it, and I think for good reason. But the parents should reach out, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a parent that called me. A child attends, a few days ago, a child attends one of these non-public full-time special education schools, in which the child is placed there by their county school, by their local education school, because they need, outside of general, they need a greater amount of services. And that parent, for one thing I want to say, whatever access, whatever particularly laptops or whatever the school district is providing to the students that are in the district schools, those children are eligible or should get that. So if the schools, so for example, Prince George's County will provide laptops to all of their students. They met in the parking lot, I believe the week of April, the first week of April. They met, the parents were alerted, come to the parking lot of your neighborhood school where your child attend, and we'll be passing out Chromebooks. Okay. Any child that attend, that's a resident of Prince George's County, and a child attend a private school, non-public school, they're eligible to go to their neighborhood school that they would have been attended and receive a Chromebook as well. So that's number one. So they're still entitled to all of those things. And
just so I can plug in my county,
yes,
we also provide laptops
and Chromebook. Okay.
Here in Montgomery County Public Schools. We also receive, just to plug that in, just for
yes. And no, but that's an important point, because those children that attend non-public schools that live in Montgomery County, they're entitled to, just because they're in a non-public school, they're still entitled to everything the children and that the school they would be attending is entitled to as well. So they can go to that, but in terms of the who they should contact first, they should make contact, or the non-public schools should be contacting those parents, just like how the regular schools would, and conduct the distant learning. If that's not happening, then they can do what we suggest the other parents do. Contact the special ed coordinator at the school that your child would be going to normally, or the principal of the neighborhood school, if you're unable to get result from the non-public school. And the situation that I was telling you about, in which the parent contacted me, that's what we did. The non-public school, the parent reached out, the non-public school sent the parent no information about distant learning. The parent contacted me. We reached out to the non-public school, didn't get a response in a timely manner, and contact the neighborhood school that the child would normally attend. And but then the non-public school eventually contacted us and set those things up. So in this case, the parents have two options. The first, they should go to the neighborhood, to the non-public school first, because that's who's servicing them. That's who the case manager and special ed coordinator and chair is at that school. If they don't get appropriate or timely response, they can go to the neighborhood school they would be attending.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So before we close out, does anyone who's watching have any questions that they would like Dr. Marryshow to answer while we're here? Just to proffer, we are hoping to do this more often, right, Dr. Marryshow?
Yes.
Hoping to have maybe a special education teacher.
That's correct.
Next time, we're not sure exactly how often we'll do this, but parents can send message questions that we can either answer live or we can get back to people later. So part of this whole process is to help parents understand what they should be expecting. That's the first step. And then, of course, the next step is questions as to how to help their child at home. And that's where a special ed teacher will come in. A school counselor may come in to help in that respect. So anyone who may have a suggestion as to what topic you want us to talk about moving forward to help you with your child, with your special needs child, send me a message on any platform. You can send it Facebook Messenger, or you can email me. I will put my email address and Dr. Marryshow's information on there and go from there, okay? So if anybody has any topics that you think you want to know about, let us know and we will try to cover it. Is there anything else that you can think of, Dr. Marryshow, that you think parents should be aware of right now as they move forward in educating their children at home during this COVID-19 pandemic and all the stresses that come along with it?
Sure. No, I just want to close by saying communication is important. Communicate with your school. Your school should respond to you. Communicate with your children about their learning experience at home. And also, I think it's you spoke, Fatmata, about us doing this again. At some point, I think it's important because schools will reopen at some point. I think it's important for us to talk to parents about moving forward. And, for many parents, prior to the COVID-19, their children may have been having difficulties at school, even with an IEP, that the school may not have been serving them appropriately. And want to talk some more about what parents can do, steps parents can take to make sure that their children are successful. Want to talk about topics like, should children with an IEP be retained, and what kind of impact that can have on them. So there's a number of different topics that we can that I think it's important down the line for parents to talk about. But in terms of now, during this period of COVID-19, I think at the present time, all children receiving special education services should be receiving distant learning, virtual learning, in which they interact with the teacher. Their related services, for the most part, should be provided, with just a few exceptions, should be provided through distant learning as well, meaning the IEP and related services goals should be implemented. If those things are not happening, then the school is not providing their child a free and appropriate education. So I think it's important that parents to ensure that those things are happening. And the point you made, and this will be my last point, that if parents don't have a copy of the child's IEP, reach out to the school and get a copy of it, because it's important to have during this time, and you can facilitate your child's learning.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek. It's been a great time, I think. A lot of good information provided, and you've done a really good job, I think, of explaining it. Hopefully, parents will agree with me, and those who are watching will agree with me. And I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time, for taking your Sunday and your Easter Sunday at that, to do this with me. And I know we tried before and audio wasn't that great, but we have now gotten it right.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. And again, just to reiterate for people, I've known Derek for over 20 years, and he's very knowledgeable, and everything he's saying, he has firsthand knowledge about. We both have worked in this field for the past 20 years at minimum. Him even longer. He was, I think he was what, principal or vice principal of a school?
no, I was a school psychologist, and I was chair of specific programs
Okay.
in the District of Columbia schools, the ED programs, over all of the ED programs and so forth. Yes.
See? So he has plethora of information. We can't do that in one sitting, but we can provide more information if requested. And I'm sure we have not even touched on some of the things that parents are personally going through right now at home with their kids. So now we have, all parents have actual real life experiences of trying to teach the special ed kids in the house. So those of you who have that, please feel safe that you can message me on Messenger, Facebook Messenger, on topics that you want to be covered, that you want to see discussed and covered. And we will do our best to do that. Even if it requires us doing some research on some of these things that we all know is new, right? So some of these things are new. All this is a new situation for all of us, and we're all learning. And I want parents to realize that the stress you're feeling is normal. You already know that you've had stresses before this COVID-19 happened. Like I always used to tell parents, I'm your special ed attorney and or advocate, but I also understand that you go home with it. I don't, and I have that luxury. You don't. And all of those of us who try to work and help parents in this field understand the plight of a parent with special needs children, but also the joy in having a child who soaks up everything, right? The joy of having a child who wants to learn, wants to progress, and is willing, so long as you give them the appropriate services, so long as you put them in the right setting, and you make sure that what they're receiving is what they should receive and what would be helpful to them. And it's been a joy working and helping parents with children with special needs. It's been my heart and soul for over 20 years. And I can say that it's probably one of the best parts of being a special ed attorney, and that you get to see the progress, right, Derek? You get to see the growth of these students, and you get to see that at the end of the day, they are no different than general ed student, only in that they learn differently, right? They
Absolutely.
just require a different way of receiving information and processing information, but they do want to make something of themselves.
Yes. You get to go to the graduations.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's what we're working for. And parents, thank you for joining us. And we will be back with more information and hopefully more professionals, like a teacher maybe, and related service providers. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Fatmata. You have a great afternoon.
You do the same. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.